As announced in my Bigger Games Coming 2018 video, here is the version for indie games and smaller titles. One reason for this is that this year tons of very good indie games are coming out. Actually, I had trouble boiling the list down, so the honorable mention section is a bit longer than last time. If you have no clue what games are coming out this year, I have you covered. Some of them you may have never heard of. I don't want to spend too much time on the honorable mention section, so I somewhat blitz through it. If you want to skip it, here is the time code. Again, shoutouts to Carl from Carl's channel for the voice work. But enough talking, let's start. Honorable mentions. Death Trash, one of the titles you probably haven't heard of. It's a gritty cyberpunk RPG trying to follow the ways of Planescape Torment and the old CRPG Ultima 7, focusing on characters, decisions and story. Maybe it's a bit too gritty. Into the Breach. This is the new game by the FTL Faster Than Light developers. This time not in a spaceship, but in a battle mech fighting giant alien kaiju that try to destroy the Earth. If it is as good as FTL and has as much replayability, this game is definitely worth its money. It will also release at the end of the month. Death's Gambit. Very hard to say for me. It reminds me of Castlevania and Dark Souls. Not sure why those games resonate so well with me. I assume they are often not that linear, very challenging, with focus on game mechanics, and you can explore a mysterious dark world, uncovering its secrets and lore. I grew up with the NES and the Super Nintendo, so this high-definition retro art style with all its little details brings back memories. I would say this game and the next one look like how I recall they looked back in the day, but of course the Super Nintendo had a far smaller resolution and hardware limitations, resulting in fewer details in its art and animations. Still, SNES games look even great today. A game that seems to be quite similar is Blasphemous. This was on my E3 upcoming titles list from last year. It's a dark fantasy non-linear 2D platformer. It also seems quite violent. I hope Blasphemous and Death's Gambit don't release too close to each other, else it could be a bit of Castlevania overkill. Speaking of Castlevania. Bloodstained, Ritual of the Night is coming too. This is by Koji Igarashi, one of the directors behind the masterpiece Castlevania Symphony of the Night. And if he shows a new Castlevania, just named differently, he has my attention. I have to say it looks really good. Another legendary game developer is Warren Spector, who back in the day worked at Looking Glass Studios, often as a producer. Guess who is working on System Shock 3? Warren Spector, who was a producer of the first System Shock and a lot of other classics. In addition, the company he now works for was founded by a man called Paul Neurus, who also worked at Looking Glass Studios back in the day. Not sure if System Shock 3 will release 2018 though. Interestingly, Paul Neurus works on Underworld Ascendant, a successor to the legendary Ultima Underworld The Stygian Abyss, which was the first first-person 3D RPG ever made and influenced a lot of games. Even the guys at FromSoft in Japan made an Ultima Underworld clone for PlayStation 1 called Kingsfield, which should later evolve into Shadow Tower and Demon's Souls. So as a Souls fan, I can't thank Paul and Rowan and their team enough for making Ultima Underworld and changing the world of gaming. Not to mention that my favorite game of all time is the first Deus Ex from 2000, where Warren Spector was the director. Oh, by the way, System Shock itself gets a remake too. 2013, a very beautiful and well-executed game called Guacamelee was released. Now the developers announced Guacamelee 2, at least for PlayStation 4. A PC release seems likely, but no information yet. The developers explained that they want to focus on the PlayStation release first. Let us continue colorful with the hand-drawn action RPG Indivisible. It's by the developers of the amazing fighting game Skullgirls. The developers already proved that they are good at hand-drawing animations and can do deep gameplay as well. I also want to mention Vampire by Don't Not Entertainment, even though it's not really indie, where you play a vampire and your choices impact the game's progression. The option to play through the game and don't kill anyone reminds me of games like Deus Ex. It sounds quite interesting. But now to the games I'm looking forward the most. The order is not set into stone and some titles will not surprise anyone who knows me.
Order.
A tier. We talked about Death's Gambit in the honorable mention section. Now here is the other game that is reminiscent of the Souls games. It's an old Germanic word which should be pronounced A tier and means something like poisonous or evil. I often have to do with old Germanic words and mythology through my Lord of the Rings and Tolkien content, so I really like the setting of the mythological Norse world. I expected it to release last year and it was also on my list of 2017, but it has not come out yet, so here it is again, because I'm still very interested. It got a bit silent around the game, but the developers explained that they are now focusing on finishing the game, so it should be out at some point this year. If not, it will be on my list for next year too. I don't mind the developers taking their time as long as it will be good. The art style and it being very Souls-like instantly got my attention, especially after the Souls series ended. I'm hungry for more. I like the protagonist, enemy and boss design, it has something very unique. They also use some modern post-processing and lighting techniques for their pixel art look. However, the most important part of a game like this is how it plays. The controls have to be very responsive and the animations have to be detailed at the right places. Hits have to feel heavy and impactful. The mechanics must be challenging and hard to master, but easy to learn without missing complexity. I hope they can get this part right too, because they already nailed the art style. Should it play great and it having enough content too, this could become a very good game. ENIC. Objects in Space. This might be the biggest surprise on my list. A game about space travel, but it plays more like a submarine simulation. In this regard, it somehow reminds me a bit of Papers, Please. You have many simple tasks, but somehow they all have great impact and a story evolves through doing those tasks and making some tough decisions, without actually showing a lot visually. Much is just you thinking about it and your imagination. I recommend watching the gameplay video linked in the description. Basically, you are not seeing what is going on. The game abstracts every mechanic, your position and the position of other ships on few control monitors. And with those, you have to make decisions that influence you and other space travelers heavily, like flying a real spacecraft. This game is for sure not for everyone, but I think it can create very tense moments and pull you in, because the game uses the player's own imagination and just gives you tools on a very abstract level. It's interesting how in games like this you actually don't bother if nothing happens for some time, because you know how stressful it can become if something is happening. With this and knowing about the potential that something might go totally wrong very soon, the game creates a very powerful suspense we know from those submarine games, and that is something only few games do these days. Leben. Griftlands. You probably saw this one at E3 2017. It's an RPG by Klei Entertainment. The trailer shows the adventure of a character who wanders this alien sci-fi world and meets other characters. It seems that the plot can change depending on what decisions you make in the game, what characters you meet and what characters you take as companions. They also use procedural generated content, which has of course some risks, but if smartly used at the right places has a lot of potential. They also explained that they want to give you a lot of options outside of combat and also allow some morally questionable decisions. This might be something like the narrative Legos Ken Levine, who is of course not involved in this game, sometimes speaks about. There also will be combat that looks round-based. I have to say, if the combat is just okay, I would not mind, because the narrative options and decisions you can make are the most interesting part for me. If the combat is great too, that's a nice bonus. I hope for a very free RPG and an interesting world to explore, with interactions that allow a huge number of possible solutions and outcomes. So in my imagination, this game has huge potential, and I trust Klei Entertainment because I liked a lot of their games. For example, I still play Don't Starve together with some friends from time to time, and I hope Griftlands will be good too. Carnot. Sunless Skies. It's already available as an early access title on Steam. Maybe they released it a little bit too early. As explained last year, I think their previous game, Sunless Sea, was one of the best written games I have ever played. The world and ideas behind it are so unique and well done, I have trouble to find words to praise it. Even though it has been years since I last played it, I still have memories of very unique moments and things that happened in the game. It looks quite simplistic, but manages to surprise you and creates tense and uncanny moments, accentuated with an amazing soundtrack. I expect Sunless Skies to be very similar and just hope that they will evolve and polish the gameplay further compared to Sunless Sea. It could end up as Sunless Sea just in space, and even that would be enough for me, to be honest, but for a general recommendation this could be not enough. However, this game is far from finished, so I still see a lot of potential and development. Of course, nobody should expect a masterpiece of combat mechanics, but expect a masterpiece of writing and world building. If you are looking for a tense atmosphere and well-written texts that describe very bizarre and Lovecraftian places and events in a way you have not seen before, this game might be interesting for you. If you don't mind grinding a bit or maybe cheating to overcome the grind, then I can also recommend Sunless Sea. It's not like that the gameplay is totally garbage, but it pales to the writing quality and is just quite average. To make it further into the game, you have to grind money and stats a lot, which was often criticized. I would say it lacked a bit of balancing here and there. Sunless Skies now has the potential to improve here, and I'm sure it will. Still no release date, but I would expect a release around July. But as mentioned, it's already available as an early access title. The developers also announced a new big update coming soon.
Nell.
The Last Night. This art style resonates so well with me, and I'm no exception. It's the colorful retro pixel look combined with modern 3D rendering techniques. Basically, the world is or looks like 2D, except for the floor and parts of the background, with a lot of layers that generate depth, but lighting, particles, shadows, reflections, physics and post-processing effects are so to say 3D. This combination plus tons of details create an art style so unique and gorgeous that I would pay just to watch it for 2 hours. That's art, and as someone who loves sci-fi and cyberpunk, this game is really high up my list. I also like 80s synthwave from sci-fi movies like Blade Runner, which the game has covered too. However, we don't know too much about the actual gameplay. It could end up as art style the game. As far as we know, it will be possible to explore the city relatively free, and it will also have some stealth and gunfight elements. I actually thought it would be more like an adventure, like the Blade Runner adventure game, but it seems that it will have platforming elements too. Maybe a mixture of all these elements. We will see. In the meantime, I recommend watching the old Blade Runner movie and the new one too.
Todd.
Return of the Obra Dinn. No surprise, I mentioned Papers, Please before, a game about controlling passports by Lucas Pope. Never would I have thought that a game about controlling passports would be one of the best games I have ever played. So here is his new game, Return of the Obra Dinn. It has a very unique art style, and he also posts a lot of information about the game's development on a forum. I will link it down in the description for those interested. The game is an adventure playing in the early 19th century, where you have to find out what happened to the crew of the East India Company ship Obra Dinn that vanished and reappeared 5 years later, but with no crew on board, a ghost ship. You now have to find out and reconstruct what has happened. To help you, you have access to the strange artifact that lets you see past memories by touching objects. I think you complete the game when you have figured out the fates of all crew members and passengers. And yes, that has the potential to get boring and confusing at some point, but if there's one person who can make it work, it's Lucas Pope. I think the premise of the game seems really interesting, and that the game is not holding your hand, so you can feel like Sherlock Holmes solving a mystery. I hope the game is challenging with a very good story.
Mean.
Mount & Blade Bannerlord. Morpheus once said to Neo, "Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is." This also applies to Mount & Blade. It's difficult to explain what this game is or why it's so good and addictive. You have to see it yourself. From the outside it looks like a clunky mess of hot garbage that does everything but nothing right, but somehow the combination of all its mechanics make it a game to be remembered. I often tell the story how I bought Mount & Blade Warband for like €3 during a Steam sale over the holidays, and then suddenly it was like 200 hours later. I had to stop playing because it consumed my whole free time, not because I didn't like it anymore. So what do you do in Mount & Blade? Well, it's also an RPG, so you create a character, do bad and repetitive quests, find companions in cities. But somehow it's also a strategy game, so you recruit men and train them to soldiers, creating an army and commanding them in the battlefield or lay siege upon other cities. But you also fight with weapons in the third-person perspective yourself, using a relatively complex combat system, even riding a horse, so like an action RPG. But you can also buy goods and trade them with other cities. You can join a faction or create your own and conquer castles, cities and villages and upgrade them. You have diplomacy and subordinate lords who you can give own armies and fiefs. You can then send them to defend certain parts of your kingdom, and sometimes you have to defend yourself against sieges. You can also get defeated, imprisoned, so you potentially have to start anew when you manage to escape or get freed, planning your revenge until you finally defeat the one who has once imprisoned you. So it's also a sandbox game. Considering all of this, a game like this could not exist, but it somehow does. And we will get a new game hopefully this year with Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord. I just expect an updated version of the old Mount & Blade, with again good mod support and slightly improved siege combat. That's all I need. Some sort of co-op would be nice too. Not sure if I can handle this game, should it be good, but I will try. Thank you for watching.